Hello everyone and welcome to Avantika Designeering series or ADS as we like to call it. Every week on Wednesday, we feature design and technology leaders who share their professional journey, their thoughts on their domain of work, and designeering where the world of design and engineering meet. Make sure you follow us on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And with that, let's continue with your show.
If you believe you are not creative nor a creator, take a look at your life. What you see is what you have created. You have had ideas and you have implemented them. That is creation. From having an idea of what to eat, what vacations to take, to what job you have, it has all followed the same principle idea and implementation. It is so simple and comes naturally that most people don't realize that they have the creative power. There is something really joyful about seeing an idea come to life. For me personally, it is a very gratifying experience, and that is uplifting and nourishes me as a human being. And such is the conversation on our today's episode with Vikram Damodaran, the Vice President of Technology and Innovation at Diageo India. He is a creator and evangelist of entrepreneurship and innovation who helps drive large scale business initiatives with long term strategic plans. He talks about technology, innovation, and creating an impact professionally and personally. This week, while we set on a new journey, we speak to him on the joy of creation using the principles of designeering. Hello, Vikram. Welcome to Avantika Designeering podcast series. It's an honor for us to host you on our show.
Hi, Rohit. Wish you a very good morning on this beautiful Sunday. Pleasure to be here and a privilege to be invited.
Thank you so much. So, as an icebreaker, innovation and entrepreneurship have always intrigued you. Can you share a new idea or an innovation that has caught your attention and you believe it will be a massive success in the coming times?
Well, there is one that's been on the grid for a while, Rohit. It's all about mobility. And if you remember the mobility story, started off with Segway trying to change the way people actually move around the city, especially given the growth of urban cities and urban cultures. Now, unfortunately, that didn't take off, but the innovation in the space of mobility, whether it's point to point travel, whether it's hyper travel with Hyperloop coming along, I think it's been or even space travel now with Tesla. So I think there's a ton of opportunity in the mobility space, especially from the view of people moving towards a shared economy, not wanting to own their own forms of transport, so on and so forth. Now, with COVID coming in, of course, the rules have changed and people now want to live in their own bubbles. So we'll see how mobility evolves. But I think that's something that will really revolutionize how 7.5 billion people around the world get to travel.
Absolutely well said. I think a lot of interesting innovations. Talking close to home, Ola Uber has actually changed the way we commute, whether we buy today a car or not, and all sorts of things. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of excitement. So, moving from that icebreaker, Vikram, to your journey, from being an entrepreneur to the health tech industry, now in beverages company, absolutely different sorts of domains. How do you connect dots in terms of working in these different domains, and can you share with our listeners your professional journey from start till now?
Happy to, Rohit. And the one phrase that really connects every choice that I've made in my personal journey has been the joy of creation. It's been something that I've lived with in my growing up years. I grew up as a single child in the family to a father who was a mechanical engineer running his own company. My mother is a gynecologist, so she was in the medical fraternity. So growing up back in the day, I only had two choices in front of me. You either became an engineer or you became a doctor. But having said that, I did enjoy both streams. I had the good fortune to be exposed to both streams of work as I was growing up. For example, we didn't have a nanny at home. So my mother used to take me to the nursing home And whenever she was going through a labor and delivery process, I would actually be there, right there, sitting there watching her deliver the baby. So I was comfortable with blood. The nurses used to come and talk to me, explain to me what my mother was doing. And I got really comfortable with the fact that, a person being able to give life or save life at the same time seemed to be, something very noble, seemed to be something that really gave me a sense of purpose to what my mom was doing. Having said that, every Sunday used to be a jolly ride with my dad on his open top Jeep. He used to have this old Willys Jeep that he had literally hand built. I still remember going to different shops over the weekend, and this spanned over 4 years, where he would buy engine blocks, he would buy tires, he would buy the wheels, the axle rods, part by part, piece by piece, everything put together. And when this thing was ready, we used to take it out on a ride, and our usual pit stop used to be the factory that my father used to run. And this was a factory that was manufacturing process equipments for chemical plants, so boilers, conveyor systems, pressure vessels. But when he used to take me there, he used to just give me a free run. We used to have milling machines, turrets, drilling systems, so on and so forth. And he would say, "Hey, look, go have fun. If you need help, just ask anybody on the shop floor, and they'll be able to help you out." And I really discovered my joy of creation there, because I used to build so many things that, in many ways, were possibly things that were of no relevant use in the practical world, but just gave me the joy of having created something that didn't exist before. And I think that really is what I call the joy of creation. Now, the reason why I gave you this piece of my childhood is because it has an immense bearing in everything that I do. And therefore, at time flew by. I went to Houston to do my master's. 3 months before I completed that degree, I got a call out of the blue from my mother saying my dad had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She did not know how long he had to live. And I dropped everything that I was doing, came back home because I was the only child in the family. I wanted to spend time with dad. And the 3 months that I spent with him, I also started running the business in parallel. And after my dad passed, I realized that I couldn't just let the business be and go back to what I was doing. There were customer commitments to keep. There were commitments that had to be honored in terms of field service. So I ran the business for about a year and a half. Learned a lot running that business, and I enjoyed it to a degree that it taught me everything that I needed to about what it meant to deliver to a promise, what it meant to manage costs, what it meant to manage people, what it meant in forms of investment. But a year and a half later, something that kept troubling me in my subconscious was, well, with all the connections that we had in the medical fraternity through my mom, and despite all the connections in the entrepreneurial network that we had through my dad, we really weren't able to do anything when we understood that my dad had pancreatic cancer. We were pretty helpless. So something propelled me to do something in the field of healthcare. And the answer wasn't obvious. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, because I was a mechanical engineer. I specialized in fluid dynamics, and now wanting to go back into the healthcare community was a challenge. But I always believe fortune favors the brave, and that's when this opportunity to work with GE came along. This was back in '99. All I knew was GE Medical Systems in those days was a company that built medical systems, and that's all I needed. I knew I could put my skills to use. Join GE, and then the next 20 years was a sheer adventure of a lifetime. Started off focusing on devices that were primarily meant for what I would call the Western economy, where science had evolved, healthcare had evolved, and that grounding gave me a lot of confidence in then adapting that learning to say, what should we do differently in order to mature healthcare delivery in India? How can we look at the business ecosystem? How can we work with clinicians? How can we look at technologies? So it gave me a well-rounded holistic view. So I spent the next 10 years, after the first 10 years working on the Western economy products, spent the next 10 years building out a set of products, technologies, solutions, business services that actually help build a consumer base for healthcare in India, and then in countries like India, Africa, Southeast Asia, parts of China, Latin America. And I think after 20 years, felt extremely rewarded by that journey. And meanwhile, while all this was happening, about 8 years ago, I developed a passion for craft beer. And that came about because of a friend that I met here in Bangalore who was big time into craft brewing. He introduced me to the world of craft beers and hops and hop extracts and hop oils and what it meant to really create flavors in what you consume. And it was then that I understood that beer or any drink for that matter is more about the experience than the drink itself, and that's been a passion of mine. So after 20 years in G, there was this question again from my subconscious that said, well, you've done what you could sitting here in India. Now what about pursuing your next passion that was around brewing? And that's how Diageo happened. So let me take a pause there, Rohit. So that's been, a high level view of how I've connected the dots between, my childhood right through to where I am right now. But it's always been the joy of creation.
Super. That was so intriguing. That was so exciting to hear that entire journey. But before I move to my next question, Vikram, what I wish to know is that while you were expressing, you meant about mechanical engineering, fluid dynamics, manufacturing, healthcare, and beverages. How have you managed to learn, unlearn, relearn all sorts of aspects of these domains?
Well, that's a great question, Rohit, because when this opportunity presented itself, I think the first reaction, if I clearly remember, the first reaction that I had when this opportunity presented itself was that of fear. And I think fear is a good thing. So if you were to ask me what promotes learning, I think it's the fear of the unknown. I think it's the fear of uncertainty. I think it's about your resilience to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that's been my primary motivator and driver to keep myself informed of the happenings around me, and the ability to adapt comes from that attitude of wanting to always keep your eyes wide open and looking around the corners. So, though I spent 20 years building my career in the healthcare domain, and needless to say, when this opportunity presented itself, more than anybody else, I had to answer this question for myself, saying, "Hey, look, you are known as a healthcare expert in the industry. Now, what does it mean for you to now become a beverage expert in the industry? It's a completely different domain. The consumers are different, the business cycles are very different, remuneration is very different, everything is different. There's not a single stream of commonality, and that's when I realized that the only stream of commonality between the two is really having the fear of the unknown. And if you went into any exercise that you wanted to undertake with that fear of the unknown and therefore wanting to learn to stay afloat, I think it's something that actually serves me well. I don't know if it's a recipe that will work for everybody, but certainly has propelled me to learn fast, adapt, and continue to evolve.
Wow, super and so beautifully expressed. One of the other things from your life, Vikram, is that you are an active blogger. You're writing a book. You mentor entrepreneurs along with your work. The question that I have is, how do you juggle between so many things? What is your method of multitasking?
That's again a very interesting question, because I've always struggled with this phrase called work-life balance. Right? You hear it so many times. At least we used to hear it a lot before the pandemic struck us. And the one thing that I've always tried to convince myself of is that there is never going to be a balance. There is never going to be a balance between work and life. It's choices that you make. I might choose, like I did today, to spend my Sunday morning with my good old friend Rohit, talking about life and career and innovation. But that's a personal choice I had to make. Now, if I were to zoom out from the choice and say, well, should I have just spent the day with my family? I think that question becomes irrelevant when you know that the choice you've made has actually led to a meaningful outcome. A meaningful outcome could be, well, reconnecting with an old friend. A meaningful outcome could be just sharing something that somebody else could benefit from. Or a meaningful outcome could be me learning through the questions you ask me. So each of these things fundamentally have to result in a meaningful outcome. And therefore, when I do whatever I need to do, the choice that I make fundamentally governs where I want to spend my time. To tell you the truth, Rohit, when I look at doing multiple things, I don't see it as multitasking, but it's just a series of things that I like to do. So just like you said, but whether it was about writing a book, or whether it's blogging or mentoring entrepreneurs, or even spending time on an interview like this, or playing golf. It's a personal choice that I make. And there are times when I feel it was a good decision to spend time. And there are times when I feel maybe this wasn't the right thing to do today. And it works both ways and you learn again. So if you ask me multitasking, it's more about choice making. And I think with time and with experience, you kind of learn where to put your time. It's almost like learning where to put your money. And if you were judicious about where you spend your time, I'm sure you'll enjoy life even more.
Thank you so much, first of all, for honoring this on a Sunday morning. So, moving from that inspirational bit to you being an intrapreneur at GE, from what seems about your work at Diageo, it is similar in that phase. So, what's your view on the culture with Indian enterprises that does intrapreneurship in Indian context really work?
Let me zoom out and answer that question slightly differently, Rohit. When I look at the word entrepreneurship, I didn't hear it until a few years ago. It 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 was to me as I grew my career in G. It was just a phrase that we used to say: "Take your own initiative, just get it done." Like the Nike saying, "Just do it." Entrepreneurship is pretty much similar to that, and I think just like any startup or any entrepreneurial business, the one thing that defines whether that culture will flourish and grow within the organization is completely dependent on the team. It's never an individualistic role. You can be an entrepreneur, but if the team that you have around you, whether it's people who you work with, who work for you, or who you report to, it doesn't matter. If that team doesn't really understand the culture of entrepreneurship, it's very, very difficult for an individual to sustain being an entrepreneur in a large organization, because a large organization is like a well-oiled machine. For you, a single part to make a difference in that large, well-oiled machine is never going to happen until you start slowly greasing, the parts around you to work the way you want to. And therefore, entrepreneurship, whether it is GE, Diageo, a multinational organization, or an Indian company, I think it all comes down to the people, and people form the bedrock of the culture that you want to see. So I think that's clearly, in my mind, the most important aspect that I look out for: teams, stakeholders, leadership, and the organizational culture and ethos of the people that I work with that defines whether entrepreneurship will scale or not.
Hey, did you know Diageo has created the world's first ever 100% plastic free paper based spirits bottle made entirely from sustainable sourced wood? The bottle will debut with Johnny Walker, the world's #1 Scotch whiskey, in early 2021. Absolutely well said. I think life is about finding amazing people around you, and it always works in terms of your personal. So the question that I have is, you come from the world of technology. You right now in terms of your domain, you also handle or you also manage the innovation side of business. The question is, how do you blend design at your work, since you lead technology and innovation teams at Diageo?
Excellent. Again, I'm going to go back 25 years in my life, and I'm going to tell you a tidbit that not many people know about me. Apart from having been a mechanical engineer, I actually had the opportunity to study architecture for 3 months before I switched to mechanical engineering. I actually questioned that decision over and over again, but life is what it is. Having said that, in G, as I started specializing in creating solutions for the non-consumption space, affordable healthcare for people in countries like India-like markets, one thing became obvious is that technology is merely an enabler. Technology is the easiest problem to solve, however complex it is, however expensive it was going to be. You get a bunch of brilliant people in the room, which we as a country are proud to have no dearth of. You will always be able to solve that problem. But what isn't easy and what isn't obvious is the definition of the problem that you want to solve. So if you truly want to know what is that problem that is worth solving for, that when solved for, you will create consumption, it requires a design mentality. And when I say design mentality, it's not just about how the product or the solution or the service looks and feels and interacts. It's also about the concept of design thinking, the need to show empathy, the need to be able to really wear the shoes of the person for whom you want to solve a problem for, and therefore decide how big of a problem it is, and therefore decide how good the solution should be, so on and so forth. So in my mind, design started playing a massive role as we started creating and incubating solutions for the affordable healthcare space. Having let go of my architecture dream, we ended up creating a design studio in G, and this happened about roughly 8 years ago. And that played a massive role in terms of clearly honing our ability as engineers and designers together, working together, helping us define the problem well, and therefore starting to look at appropriate solutions that would really deliver meaningful output. Now, if I translate that learning back into the Diageo world is all about selling experiences. Unlike the healthcare world where consumption was an issue, not all of us start consuming healthcare services from the day we're born, and there is no legal consumption age for healthcare. It just happens when it has to happen. But in the case of alcoholic beverages, you're dealing with a legal drinking age. Many people tend to start early. They start experiencing things early. So when you're dealing with a market that is natively driven by consumption, selling an experience becomes all the more important for you to be able to define what is that next experience that consumers want. And that can happen only if you have this mentality of empathy, only if you have the ability to really look past the obvious and create a trend that doesn't exist today. And I think that's really where what I learned in my past life and what I'm trying to do today actually come together.
Interesting. I think you've got a great ability to connect these dots and so beautifully getting expressed in these conversations. So, one of the things, Vikram, in a conference that you were speaking at, you discussed on frugal and conscious, at the same time, not frivolous and costly innovation. Can you elaborate on this and share an example of a company which has practiced this?
Sure, absolutely. And I let me go back to the very first example of mobility that I gave you, because it's a deep-seated following of mine. Well, let's take Segway as an example. I think Segway fundamentally identified the problem right. In my opinion, I think they identified the problem spot on in terms of saying mobility is going to be an issue. And unfortunately, the way they went around solving for it made it exclusive. If you looked at what the original purpose of Segway was fundamentally moving from point A to point B, and that was the main definition of the problem. But the features it came with, the optionality that users had, the learning curve that it had, the ownership cycle that a Segway owner had to go through, maintenance. It wasn't an asset-light model. There were so many things that were new problems that were created in the process of solving for moving from point A to point B. Whereas on the other hand, if I looked at a solution like Uber or everybody else that now follows the Uber model of moving from point A to point B, it's the exact opposite. You don't have an asset to own. There is no maintenance costs involved. There is absolutely nothing for you to take care of other than calling for a cab, getting in, and going to the destination of choice. Now, I think that is a classic example to keep in mind of how the same problem of moving from point A to point B can be handled in two very, very different ways, solving for very, very different problems. And I think that's something that is true for every problem. Now, I'll give you another example. If you were to look at just the world of telephony, we're looking at telephones as devices to make a call. Now, if I actually asked a handful of people saying how many of you actually use the phone for the purpose that it was truly built for versus using that phone to do several other things that you did not know existed today, I think the answer is more of the latter. In my entire 24 hours, I possibly used the phone to make a call for a cumulative sum of maybe about 15 minutes. Most of it is either on a chat application, a digital wallet, on the internet, so many other things that I still feel productive about, but not really using the phone for what it is today. So I think that's another lens which fundamentally tells us that the problem was to communicate, but then you could also repurpose the solution to serve a whole bunch of communication related problems with just one convergent device. And I think that's again at the very, very core of truly understanding what the problems are, and then making sure that the solution you come up with can find a scalable journey through consumption.
And while we are talking about innovation, the theory of disruptive innovation has proved to be a powerful way of thinking about innovation driven. Despite broad dissemination, the theory's core concepts have been widely misunderstood and its basic tenets frequently misapplied. According to you, what is disruptive innovation, and do you think disruption theory is in danger of becoming a victim of its own?
That's a fantastic question, because I come across this kind of behavior in terms of abusing the phrase disruptive innovation when it's not really meant to be used in the first place. In my mind, disruption happens when you create new consumption. It's a simple way of looking at it. If you were to increase consumption amongst the same set of people by twofold, I still look at it as incremental innovation. A typical example would be something that costs X now costs X by 2. You definitely are going to increase consumption because let's say it's a valued solution and it was affordable to a handful of people who are paying the price X. Now, because it's halved, you generally create an opportunity for that same solution to be used by a lot more people. I believe that is incremental innovation. Now, disruption, on the other hand, fundamentally would say, fine, this solution costs X. I could go down the path of reducing cost, maybe adding a few other features that drive consumption. Or I could create something that would totally revolutionize the way people looked at consuming a particular service. And I'll give you an example to make this more tangible. Now, again, I'm going to go back to my favorite example, probably a cliche, and these are touchscreens. Now, nobody knew what the purpose of touchscreens were when they came out. And so when the first iPad came out, while there were takers for it, and I would actually use the term rabid. I'm a rabid fan of any new technology that comes out. So I try to get my hands on it just to get a feel for what it does. And I was one of the first few to, get the first generation iPad. And if you remember the ecosystem of Apple during those days, there wasn't really much to do other than the fact that it was a beautiful interface and you just loved staring at that screen. But today, when I look at disruption, which comes from just the fact that you have a touchscreen enabled by an ecosystem of services, that's a completely different level of disruption. This, while Apple was probably the initiator of that disruption, I think companies that use the Android ecosystem that fundamentally created a brand new consumption base at a completely new cost point with services that were far more augmented. And this is one of my favorite topics of debate with let's say an Apple lover, me being an Android enthusiast. We always get into these debates, but I think that's where disruption happens. With 70% of the world's connectivity devices based on an open platform like Android versus the initiator of innovation about 15 years ago that came from Apple, I think are very, very interesting examples of disruption. One disrupted 15 years ago, the other disrupted maybe 10 years ago when they totally opened up the markets. I think disruption should always be viewed with a lens of consumption. I think that will help us as innovators discern where to put our time, effort, and money on.
So, if you, I mean, I'm sure that there's a lot to discuss on that question and get into detail, but from the perspective of our listeners, where innovations in sustainable packaging are being discussed in boardrooms of all FMCG companies. Diageo not only launched such a packaging, but it is also collaborating with other companies to promote the same. The question that I have is, what are some of the changes that you see in this ecosystem in the coming days?
Yes, and that's a very relevant question, especially in these times, fundamentally because when you look at environmental issues, be it water, be it changing climatic demographies around the world, the proliferation of waste in water, so on and so forth. Sustainable packaging fundamentally plays an important role in touching multiple aspects of the Earth's capability to sustain itself. There are four major vectors that sustainability plays on. First one is plastic waste. Fundamentally, even if most forms of plastic are recyclable today that are being used in the industry, not all of this recyclable plastic finds its way into a recycling facility. A lot of it does go into landfills and therefore has a detrimental impact on the Earth's environment. The second one is water. Water is a scarce resource. There have been continuous reports that there are cities that are going dry every year. And needless to say, in India, when you look at the next 10 years, at least five or six cities, big cities, including Bangalore, are supposed to go water negative in the next 10 years or so. And that's a scary thought. The third is greenhouse gases, which have a massive role to play in just the air you breathe and in the depletion of the ozone layer and such. And that fundamentally comes from the amount of heat that you generate and the amount of carbon consumption that you go through. So, whichever way you look at it, there is a role that the FMCG world plays because when you look at our products, we use water. When you look at our packaging, we use plastic. And when you look at our manufacturing facilities, we use a pretty massive carbon footprint. So, whichever way you look at it, we are massive contributors to the sustainability of this earth. And therefore, when you look at packaging, while packaging plays an important role from multiple aspects, whether it is protection of what it stores, whether it is guaranteeing authenticity, originality, and the quality of what people consume, or whether it just acts as a pure container for transporting goods from point A to point B. The idea here is to fundamentally minimize the usage of water, minimize the usage of non-recyclable plastic, and if you're using recyclable plastic, ensure it gets back to a recycling site and minimize your carbon footprint. So when you look at sustainable packaging, while news like the form of packaging makes it to the headlines, recently Diageo announced a fully pulp-based paper bottle for our flagship brand, Johnny Walker Black Label. And I think that's fantastic news. But the real work really goes on in the entire value chain of every ingredient that comes into our supply chain and every finished good that leaves our supply chain. So from really rethinking the water facilities, desalination facilities, or recharging facilities for groundwater, or harvesting facilities for water, every one of these things actually plays a massive role in the packaged good being delivered on a sustainable basis to the end consumer. And therefore, when we look at sustainable packaging, it's important to look at it from a 360-degree standpoint in terms of what are all the ways in which you can bring sustainability back into this Earth's environment, as opposed to looking at it just as the output that the consumer interacts with. If you can end up with a format that the consumer interacts with, which is brilliant and is going to create a wow, like the Johnny Walker paper bottle, well, we should do it. But that's not the only thing that matters. There's a lot that goes behind. The science that goes behind sustainability is just as important as the final output that the consumer interacts with.
Hey, do you know Diageo India launched a 75 crore Raising the Bar program committed to supporting bars, pubs, and restaurants serving alcohol to welcome customers back and recover following the COVID-19 pandemic. They have also encouraged more than 3.1 million people to take a pledge against drink and drive. Well said. In fact, one of the other things that I see, Vikram, in organizations, and I'm sure that you must also be facing this challenge, and that's why my next question is when nothing slows work down like waiting for everyone to agree. How do you convince your team leaders, stakeholders on the impact of innovation that you are creating? How can someone build these skills?
Well, you've got to earn your stripes, Rohit. You've got to try, fail again, and fundamentally figure it out because the answer is not straightforward. There are quite a few people in the organization who will never say that, taking a risk is not something that they're comfortable with. They'll always say, yes, absolutely, go take the risk. Let's build this business case. Let's try and fail. But for them to really cross the Lakshman Rekha between, say to do, it's a pretty large bridge that needs to be built. And so, in my view, the idea of bridge building is what needs to happen. And there's multiple ways in which you can build the bridge. The most obvious one is the present data, because very few people will be able to argue against data that is meaningful. If you can show data that says, well, here are the risks we're taking, here is how we've quantified the risk, here are the steps we're taking to mitigate it, here is where we know we will overcome these risks, here is where we know we don't have a chance today, but possibly will have a chance tomorrow, and here's where we have absolutely no clue. So to that extent, let me at least start the process of getting through the first two steps, and the third step we'll deal with as time comes closer. Having that conversation with data and evidence to back it up goes a long way. It at least opens people's mind. It's the first step to building that bridge. Once you do that, a lot of people will defer decisions because they still don't want to sign on the dotted line, and that comes through relationship building. I believe the relationship that you build with people, I think, is absolutely important, because walking into a large corporate setting, very rarely will you have the opportunity to do what you could very easily on the other side of the spectrum. That is, if you were to, incubate your own startup team, a founding team with like-minded people, like-minded vision, a purpose that binds you together. It's very, very hard to do in a corporate setting where, each function has its own KPIs. Stakeholders are fundamentally, standing up to fight for their own KPIs and are extremely right in doing so. But as somebody who's an innovator, you've got to bring these stakeholders together and see where the dots are between the functional KPIs that each stakeholder serves. And therefore, the ability to build a relationship where you can have open conversations, meaningful conversations, sometimes critical in nature, I think is absolutely important. Openness, authenticity is the next big step. So apart from data and evidence, openness, authenticity, relationships is the next big step. The last step is you have to really walk the talk. And when I say it's a big mile between say to do, there is also a big mile between, talking and then walking the talk. And therefore, you as an innovator have to be able to take the first step. And this being the week of Michael Jackson's birthday, and being a big fan, it's nothing about really convincing other people, but it's about you looking at the man in the mirror, like Michael Jackson says, and living up to who you want to be. And or like Mahatma Gandhi says, for that example, be the change you want to see. And it's going to be a long and painstaking journey, but the rewards are well worth it. If you take measured steps, if you can start showing small wins, you don't really have to go for the jackpot on day one, but if you can start taking small steps, so that way you'll also fail small. Very important to keep in mind as you're going through this journey. But take small steps, fail small, get up again, take the next step, and repeat this time and again till you hit that purpose and vision that you want to hit. And then you'll see that the organization is rallying behind you.
Super. Very, very, very beautifully expressed. Moving to my next question, there's a rise in design driven innovation where the focus is not to push a new technology, but to push a new meaning. Do you think this through the process will surpass the technology?
That's a great question, because back in my GE days, I used to work with a leader who always told me never put the cart in front of the horse, and it took me a while to understand what he meant. But his simplistic view was, well, technology is, like I said earlier during our chat, Rohit, is the easier problem to solve. And there are times when technology literally creates a new market. And there are so many examples that we know of. The birth of flight, for example. created literally the aviation industry. So therefore, technology does drive innovation. Technology does drive consumption. Technology does play a massive role in terms of creating new opportunities. And if you were to now come towards some of the newer examples, genetic engineering, for all you care, is possibly going to revolutionize the way we personalize medicine and treat people that probably had no chance of survival until a few years ago. So there is a lot to borrow from the advancement of technology. On the other hand, technologies like that come with investments. Technologies like that don't happen every year. Technologies like that require insane amounts of time, patience, money, and the cost of failure is incredibly high with those kind of technologies. On the other hand, design fundamentally starts with a primary question: what problem are you trying to solve? And if the answer to that question is extremely well defined, in my mind, design fundamentally should help you answer that question in a single phrase. If you cannot get to that single phrase, then there is no point going after that solution, because what it tells you is that the problem is a lot more complex than you thought it would be. And therefore, the way I look at it, I believe using design and technology hand in hand is an absolutely important thing for businesses to consider, because businesses do not have insane amounts of money. Businesses do not have insane amounts of time. What businesses can look forward to is an insane amount of consumption if they brought design and technology together. And that, again, there is no recipe to do this. There are some that do this better than others, but then there is really no set recipe. And the only way you can converge the two is to constantly try and learn from what from the journey that you've been on, and hone the ability to converge these two streams of thought, so that you can be much more adept at prioritization, much more adept at making the right choices of where to invest your time, resources, and effort, and therefore the kind of consumption that you want to see as an outcome.
Well said again. In fact, one of the things, since you are a leader in the world of innovation and technology, we keep hearing about the Silicon Valley innovation culture. Now, if we were to build the same in India, what will we have to do for the same? Where do we start?
Well, if I were joking with you, Rohit, I would say we should first have a good marketing plan and a communication strategy. The one thing that California does really well, or Silicon Valley does really well, is storytelling. I think, every book on entrepreneurship, fundamentally, that is worth its salt, is fundamentally come out of Silicon Valley. And whether it is a story of failure, whether it is a story of success, whether it's movies being made about, Steve Jobs and Apple, I think the entire world of communication has played a massive role in amplifying what the Silicon Valley culture is all about. And you have this beautiful season that comes on Hotstar. I think it's called Silicon Valley. I think it's fantastic to watch. But behind all that glitz, glamour, and jazz, there is a big world of perseverance, hardships, trials and tribulations that teams go through, culture that may not be consistent with what you hear in the news, that nobody ever hears of. Now, if you were to translate that into what we do here in India, I really don't see a big difference. Look at what, let's say, the Tatas have done. Look at what companies like Godrej have done. Look at what Mahindra has done in the space of EVs. Look at what our own space agency has done in the form of Mangalyaan and Chandrayaan. I think there's so many stories to be told about intrapreneurship, entrepreneurship, government innovation. I think marketing and communication should first, as a country, as an ecosystem, support the cause of innovation and support the cause of entrepreneurship, and innovation. I think that plays a massive role. Secondly, I think Silicon Valley is just a place, but in that place is an ecosystem, and that ecosystem is again built of like-minded people. So when you go to the likes of Stanford or a Caltech or a JPL or any other place in the valley, you will always find that people talk the same lingo in terms of mindsets, in terms of ideas, in terms of investments, in terms of venture capital, in terms of failures, in terms of being able to go after the next big bet. Now, If Tesla is capable of talking about sending people to Mars, do you think people in India are not capable of that dream? The answer to that question is no. There are people who talk about that dream here too. But then, where is that ecosystem that supports such people? And I think that ecosystem is very nebulous in India. It is slowly beginning to grow. It's been a lot better now than what I saw 15 years ago. But I think there is a mile to go before we actually create that strong ecosystem of like minded people coming together to harness the power of intellectual capital that we have in the country and the risk taking capability that we have in our country. So I think that's the second thing. The third thing, which I think is equally important, is there is also this notion that I've seen in the venture space, in the startup space, where ideas that germinate in the Silicon Valley quickly find takers in terms of investors in India. This is a norm because when you know that an idea has been funded elsewhere in the world, and especially in Silicon Valley, your ability to take a risk and put some risk capital on the same shadow venture, so to speak, yeah, Indianized in many ways, but a shadow venture nevertheless reduces the risk on that risk capital that you're putting in that venture. And I think that is something that we've got to slightly move away from. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. We should, because it helps us balance our risks. But we should also promote local origin entrepreneurs looking at local origin problems and local origin solutions that may or may not have a shadow elsewhere in the world. I think if we can slowly but surely start focusing on that, and over the next 5 years, 10 years, create a vast pool of such 0 to 1 ideas, as Peter Thiel calls them, vertically disruptive ideas that are of local origin. I think that will revolutionize the way entrepreneurship is seen in this country.
Super, super. Well said. Completely could relate to it as someone who successfully failed at building two enterprises. Vikram, there's so much to talk to you, but there's one final question that we have on our episode, and that is technology is changing at the speed of life, impacting our daily consumption, behavior, and more. At your workplace, you are blending technology and innovation together while we are coaching talent, we are blending the world of design and engineering at our university called as designeering. Do you think blending of these approaches is a right philosophy and something that's there to grow in due course?
The shortest answer is yes. I completely believe that designeering as a thought process is fundamental to a business outcome. And like I've said before in this podcast and through multiple chats that we've had, I think the ability to converge the two thought processes play a massive role in identifying the right problem to solve for. More importantly, I think bringing these two philosophies is a fantastic way to combine left brain right brain activity. And some people are just innately left brain and some people are right brain. Very few people actually have the toggle switch to say, okay, today I'm going to do a lot of right brain stuff. Let me just be creative in what I do, and tomorrow let me think about how I translate some of these ideas into things that are more practical, viable. But designeering as a thought process helps bridge this gap, the rift between left brain and right brain, the paucity of people that are equally left and right brain. I think designeering as a thought process can actually bring structure to the chaos, can actually bring a process minded mentality to bring these two streams together so that people, whether they're engineers or designers, can think, can be creative, and can be feasible, scalable, and viable at the same time. And I think that's clearly what will really help problems that need a solution and will really drive consumption in a meaningful manner.
Probably I'll say this for the first time, Vikram, but I feel sad that our conversation has to end here. There's so much interesting points that you made, so much to reflect back on, so much to think about. I think it's massive learning opportunity for all our listeners, and thank you so much for doing this for us.
I sincerely appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share, Rohit. And another last tidbit about me is if I hadn't become what I am today, I would have probably become a teacher. So this is one way of living my unfulfilled dream. So thanks for doing that.
Thank you so much.
Hey there, we hope you enjoyed our show. Do write to us on ads@avantika.edu.in. We look forward to your opinions, feedbacks, and suggestions of speakers you would like us to host on this show. Do tune in our channel next week on Wednesday for a new story on Hubhopper or wherever you get your podcast from. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter.